Our next speaker is Maarten Wegdam, CEO of Innovala, who will be taking us through the world-leading ReadID product. And just before Maarten starts, keep those questions coming in. We've got a couple in already, really good ones that I'll ask the presenters after Maarten's presentation. So thank you very much, Maarten.
Thanks for having me, Alan. So my name is Maarten Wegdam. I'm CEO and co-founder of Innovala with the ReadID as a primary product. So apologies for the confusion with the two names. So what I'll be talking about since this session is about innovation, is talk about NFC and how NFC can help you to create trust in identity verification. For those that attended the morning session, Alan already mentioned NFC a couple of times, and also John, our valued partner, mentioned it. So this is a new way to do remote identity verification of verifying the authenticity of documents. Innovala is a Dutch company. We are the first, by far the first, and we're the leading one in using this NFC as part of the remote identity verification products. So I'll be discussing that in more detail as we go along. So let me start a little bit with the world we're in, right? So we're in a world where maybe gradually, with ups and downs, we're getting to see each other in real life again, but we are very much disconnected. And at the same time, we're very much connected digitally. And that's the identity proving, the remote identity proving that we have to do. So we have to remotely know who we are in a world where we cannot see each other, or pre-COVID not always wanted to see each other, because who likes going to, for example, a bank to open a bank account? No one does. In this world we play in, and we have to do it securely, and we have to do it user-friendly with a proper user customer journey. So to remotely see who I am, you have to remotely check my passport. So that's quite difficult to do. So which of these documents are real? Would you be able to tell? Right? It's difficult enough if you have physical access to the passport. But if you only have a copy, a photograph of the passport, this is basically undoable, right? You might be able to do some OCRing to read some of the data, but anyone with, let's say decent computer with Photoshop and an hour to spare can make a fraudulent identity document that an OCR vendor or OCR identity document verification vendor would not be able to catch. And that's not good, right? So that jeopardizes the security of the organization doing this, but also of someone else's, another person's identity that might be stolen. So the idea here is to use the chip that's here in the passport, and this is not a new thing, right? It's maybe not so new, at least in some parts of the world. This might be new to do it for remote identification, but it's something that we've been using in airports for quite a while. Every time we fly to those e-gates, remember pre-COVID, hopefully coming soon again. So you stick your passport in one of those e-gates, and what it does, it only accepts passports with a chip. And it verifies that chip. That's the core of the process here, verifying the chip, and then of course doing a facial verification from the photo that's in the chip, because the photo in the chip is much higher resolution, so it's easier to do a facial verification. So that same trick we do remotely using your own mobile phone by reading with the NFC antenna and see the antenna of the passport, and then verifying the authenticity. It takes about 6 seconds. So this is a trend, right? So Alan mentioned it, but also, for example, Gartner mentioned this as the first trend in identity proofing, in the most recent identity proofing document. But also, in the UK, the Her Majesty Land Registry strongly advocates using NFC as the way to do, if you do a property exchange, how to remotely identify someone. And if you do that, then you kind of secure, you're in the safe harbor, as they call it. And very recently in Switzerland, the local Swiss financial regulator is strongly advocating the use of NFC to do remote identification over optical, certainly, but also video identification. So we're not alone in the world with believing in this technology. So a little bit on the technology, and I'll keep it brief, is there why are these passports so secure? So there are three mechanisms in there, right? First of all, to prevent getting access to the chip, right? We don't want to be in line for the supermarket and someone behind us reading our chip. So that's called access control, and there are two ways. The old way to do this is basic access control. The new one is PACE, which works similarly. They use a certain code which is in the machine readable zone, the two bottom lines of your passport, and that's kind of a password to get access to it, right? It's to secure access to the chip, which from a privacy perspective is a great idea. Then the most important is authenticity. So the contents of the chip, which is roughly the same things that are printed on your data page, are digitally signed by the issuing country. In my case, the Netherlands digitally signed it. So it's tamper-free. And third, but not is the cloning detection, is that you can verify that it's not only a genuine document, which you do with authenticity, but that document is there at that point in time, and not, for example, a copy that was taken 9 years ago. Yeah, so you have some form of proof of possession. Passports with chips are more widely spread than some people sometimes think, right? So in this map, we see everywhere where it's green. Yeah, that means that those countries have a passport and or ID card with a chip. If it's light green, it means the country is, let's say, less forward with its country certificate. There are ways around it. It's too complicated for this 10 minutes. If it's dark green, we are all okay, right? So that means, for example, the whole EU is okay. Northern America is okay. Australia, New Zealand is okay. So these are countries where you can use that NFC trick to verify the authenticity of an identity document. To zoom in, let's zoom in on some use cases. Might be more interesting than the technology itself. So one that we are particularly proud of is from SK ID Solutions. This is a company from Estonia. And they do digital signatures, and according to the qualified digital signatures, which is the highest level of digital signatures in the EU, and the holy grail of identity proving. And we worked with them, and got certified as the first worldwide to do this remote identity proving for these qualified digital signatures. And to quote their CEO, if you want to make sure that the document is real, and then identity was and is used right now, then there's no alternative to NFC, and of course in combination again with biometrics to make sure that not someone borrowed the document. A second use case I want to highlight here is the Rabobank. So we work with WorldReach primarily with some travel-related cases. So I deliberately pointed out some non-travel-related cases here. So the Rabobank is the second biggest Dutch consumer bank, and they were the first worldwide to use NFC for onboarding, so for the Know Your Customer process. So this was 2017, December 2017, I think. The Rabo mobile identification app, it's called, right? So the primary case was a customer turning 18, they would have to go to a branch, they wouldn't do it, they would refuse and switch bank, etc. So you can do this remotely, but also new to bank, just signing up for the bank account, or all kind of business cases, business users also used by the Rabobank. And the big success here was conversion. So the amount of consumers that would be able to do this went up from 35 to 60%. So they would have almost double their online customer onboarding process using ReadID and NFC. My last slide, so we can go to the panel, is a little bit on ReadID itself, because I've been talking about the technology primarily. And so a nice number here is from ABN AMRO, this third biggest Dutch bank. They recently went public for the mortgages application that 96% of the users in the first attempt make it through the whole process, including facial verification. So that's a very high percentage, right? For people in the audience that are maybe not so much in this industry, this is a really high percentage to have certainly on the first attempt. but also the EU settlements program that John already mentioned, right? So 68% said it was quite easy. And that's partly because of the main challenge in the process is how to properly position the document on the phone. So we have dynamic user guidance for this, and that helps a lot. Another point is that it's very scalable, right? Other technologies tend to have a human component, and their humans simply do not scale as good as a machine somewhere in the cloud does. Proof of the pudding is in the eating, so please do feel free to maybe tune the panel, scan your own document or your own passport and see how it works. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maarten. That was excellent. And please do kind of check it out if you can do. Right. Can we get all the panelists back online, unmuted, and the video turned on? We've got questions that have been coming in during the presentations. And I'd like to start off with one from Marta, who says, I think it's probably aimed at you, John. Can you get a verifiable credential of the settled status?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for that question. I guess it's a reference specifically to the EU settlement scheme that I mentioned. It's run by the UK Home Office. The answer is theoretically yes, although in that case, as I say, that's not how we're doing it. So our piece, as I say, in other places, we're out there innovating around issuance, not just an initial IDV step, but issuance of a digital travel credential and multiple use cases, for example, travel and immigration purposes. Just on this particular question, the answer is what happens in terms of the credential is actually part of a bigger Home Office across the immigration spectrum thing that they call digital permissions. So the Home Office, I don't want to speak, I used to work for the Home Office in the UK for many years. I don't work for them anymore, so I better not speak on their behalf. But what they are doing, as we understand it, is a thing that they call digital permissions, which they issued a policy paper on recently, which is essentially a way that the public and indeed other folks that need to get verification, for example, employers, universities, landlords, can go to the Home Office and ask for verification of that person's status. But to the particular question, the Home Office is not issuing credentials, digital credentials to those people. But I'm not going to comment on it any further than that.
But Shiv, it is a possibility as a use case, isn't it? I mean, we're talking potential rather than actual.
No, absolutely. And I think what I can mention is like not about UK, but this similar thing is happening in US, where they are under innovation. They are looking at how they can the Home Office can use this verifiable credentials for this purpose with respect to immigration, visas, and everything. So it's a potential, and I think what is also happening in the UK is that the government is quite interested in this technology with respect to decentralized identity, verifiable credentials, and then there are this is also being discussed in the Parliament, and also one of the I think public organizations which is taking a lead is actually NHS. Which is already kind of doing pilots with this technology. But obviously, I think once a few successful pilots are there, I think I'm quite sure that I think even Home Office would use this for this very specific purpose also.
Thanks. I've got a question probably aimed at you, Maarten. It's from Jalil. I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to know how the face images are stored inside the chip. If it is not raw image, what is the regulation between countries to encode the face image?
So good question. So thank you. So the passport chips, as the whole passport, are standardized by ICAO. It's part of the United Nations. So they put a list of formats there. What I see in reality, there might be other formats allowed. I would have to look it up, but it's a JPEG or JPEG 2000. Right, because they are pretty efficient in compressing, right? Because a chip might sound like a lot of data. There's really a relatively low amount of data in there. So a photograph might be like 20 kilobytes of a JPEG. That is still high resolution compared to if you take a photograph of the document, because it's not obscured by something like watermarks, etc. So it gives a much better starting point for facial recognition. But it's a JPEG 2000 is a little bit of a weird format, but it's more or less standardized and workable. Okay.
Second question, I think from the same person. What type of biometrics are accepted for the European Union now? I think this is for passports.
Yeah, that's of course a very broad question, right? So it depends on the use case and consent, etc. But if I focus on passports, and that's probably what Jalil means, is that there can be actually a wet, like a JPEG of a wet signature on there, right? It's not really biometrics, but what's always in there is face image that's standardized worldwide, and what's almost always in there is fingerprints. The face image you can just read, right? It's not a problem. It's just meant to be read. Fingerprints is like half-half. So you can read it, but only with permission of the issuing country. So the government of the Netherlands would have to allow someone else to read it. In reality, within the EU, they're working on this for, I don't know, about 20 years, and they still haven't managed to exchange those. The chances of this being allowed to a non-EU country, in my personal view, are very small. At least I'm expecting to have retired, and maybe already my kids have retired before that has happened. So I wouldn't hold my breath for that one. But the fingerprints are in there, and for example, for police use cases, they could be read by other countries, and we're actually working with 2 countries on this. So if the EU really gets their acts together and starts, let's say, actually empowering others to do it. As a commercial company, it's hopeless, right? So if I have a bank customer that says, I would like to read the fingerprints, I would say, I would like that as well. And I would, like global eating to be over and COVID to be gone, but it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Okay. Thank you for that, Maarten. I've got a question probably for John, I reckon. At the Home Office, we talked about kind of inclusive systems this morning in the presentation and the panel session. At the Home Office, what about non-connected people? How do you ensure anyone can apply?
Yeah, you're right. That's an important issue, Alan, because certainly we get this question quite a lot, which is, hey, you're doing some interesting stuff, which seems to be kind of pushing the envelope in terms of, doing things remotely. I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to send my documents. What about those people who are kind of the Home Office actually describes, the UK government generally describes this as, which is a curious word actually, they call them vulnerable. I would think of that more as kind of marginal or digitally unconnected, but they tend to describe them as vulnerable. But I think the core of my answer is we would not make the claim that what we're doing captures 100% of people. I think the important thing is that there are multiple channels kind of ways. So if you're in the business of government to citizen services, which is largely where we operate, it's clearly the policy is for the government client and not for us to dictate. But the answer, I think, to the question is really around multiple channels. There has to be, is the remote digital way of doing things, of identifying yourself, an option rather than a requirement. And I think if it's an option, you're in safe territory, and allow the public to choose that if they want to, and give them other options as well if they want to choose those. And just to give some credit to the Home Office on that particular scheme, they did a huge amount of work in the community with local governments, etc., around the UK, providing places where folks who weren't able or didn't want to do the digital route to go to somewhere to be able to do that in person in a more traditional way. So that's not our piece of the puzzle, as you might imagine. That's the Home Office otherwise aside from us, but they've done a very nice job of that. I think the punchline of that answer, Alan, is considerably better than 90%, somewhere in the middle 90% of people chose the digital route. And that's what we're finding is if you make that available and the user experience is good and it works, we need to give people the option, but most of them will choose the thing that's convenient to them.
Add to that, we've seen that in other use cases as well, right? So typically it's used more than customers initially expected, right? They might expect an 80-20 and it becomes 90-10, or so the convenience factor of not having to go somewhere, not having to mail things is such that people are motivated to do it and manage to do it and are happy to do it. But not everyone, right? There will always be some exceptions, and you should allow for those.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Got a question for Shiv, I believe. It's on the benefits of SSI versus other identity solutions.
Okay, thank you for that question, Alan. So I think the way we have to compare this is like when we look at the evolution of digital identity, we basically started with those centralized solutions where basically one organization kind of does the issuance, and then they kind of control the data as well. And then eventually we moved to federated identity, where more than one organization started participating in basically issuing an identity and kind of using the same identity for multiple purposes. And then now we are basically in a stage where we are talking about a self-sovereign identity, which is a more user-centric identity, where the user is in control, right? Because when you look at this, now now all the services, most of the digital services that we talk about, they are quite user-centric, right? In the sense like the social media, the financial services, and then even the public services that are being provided. And that is where I think we are moving towards a world where the user becomes the center of the entire bouquet of services, and that is where the concept of self-sovereign identity comes in, wherein the user is basically able to control their identity. And it's also about basically, I think it's about the portability, interoperability, it's about security. So what an SSI does is that it allows the user to basically create a mechanism through which they can store their information and manage their information in a very privacy and consent oriented manner. So I think the key concept of SSI is about empowering users with data ownership, privacy, and consent, right? And I think that is one of the themes which even GDPR kind of talks about, because I think when we talk about data protection, we want to put the user back in control, right? With respect to what they want to do with their data, how they want to share, with whom they want to share, and for how long. And this is exactly what SSI enables. And this is where I think, and then also what happens is like, it also kind of, it's not just from a user perspective, but also from organizations perspective, or service providers perspective, it becomes easier for them to comply with data regulations, right? Because otherwise they have to spend a lot of money with respect to being in compliance with these laws, or they face fines which could run into billions, right? And this is where it's like this solution, it's user-centric, but it helps the businesses as well.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks for that, Shiv. I've got an NFC question, so I believe that Maarten would probably be best to start off with this about. And I think it's related to IML5, but you can confer. In some cases, in some countries, video identification is used. For example, in Germany. Do you see this as a competing technology for NFC?
So it's certainly an older technology. So what we see is that it's in Germany, and I think it used to be in Switzerland and a little bit in Spain. So it's, I wouldn't say it's competing. So it does two things, right? You wave your document in front of the camera. So that's kind of identity document verification, but in that sense, it's competing. And then you do a kind of holder verification, as we call it. Is this really me? And then you add this with like a real consent. Are you aware that you are opening up a bank account, for example, and not, applying for a lottery ticket? So what we typically do is, people don't really like that, right? So the drop-off rate is a lot. It takes a long time. It's very expensive. It doesn't scale. So, but we have some customers that replace the initial part of the process. So they use NFC to check that I really exist, right? So check the validity of my document. And then they use, instead of facial verification, they use a video process to check that, it's me and that I belong to that. For example, we have some experiments or pilots with notaries that do this, right? So they are very sensitive about, is someone aware that they're selling, for example, a house? So in that sense, we kind of replacing part of the process, and we partly working with them. Having said that, no one voluntarily does video identification, right? So it's typically regulator pushed, and regulators tend to move away from it. We see in several countries.
Okay.
Right. I'd like to add very quickly, Alan, to that, because I think this what Maarten just mentioned, right? This exactly same thing happened in India also. So the RBI, which is the main regulator, they have they want all the banks to basically go through this video KYC. It's very effort intensive, right? Because you are expecting somebody else from the bank or the financial institute to be on the other side interacting with the user. So the way I look at this is like, this is one step behind the digital onboarding, because with respect to how the way we are looking at identity proofing with respect to biometrics and everything, I think it's like eventually they would move to the fully automated digital onboarding. So it's like one step behind is what video KYC is, or video verification is.
Okay, and thanks for that. And I think this is a really good segue into not to plug our next session, which is on health credentials, but for seamless travel use cases, could passengers send health credentials as well as ID data? Is that something you can kick off with, John?
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer to that question is yes, but let me try and expand on that a little bit. In fact, we are hoping to do something similar, and I forgot to mention it, so thanks for the reminder. On the Canadian pilot that I described, the chain of trust, we're not doing this yet with real people, but we are behind the scenes integrating that system that I described, the chain of trust, with the common pass which is one of the health folks. If you're following the health debate, I know you've got a panel on it coming next, so I won't say too much, Alan, but for those who are following that debate will be aware that around the different regions of the world, we're getting a number of, maybe a half a dozen at least, major kind of efforts at doing a digital health pass of some kind. One of those is provided by an organization called the Commons Project that offers this service called Common Pass, which is essentially precisely about this. It's saying, you know, in parallel with the digital travel credential to cross the border, can we provide, not as part of that digital travel credential, because the DTC is the same structure as the passport, it's an ICAO standard, right? So we can't kind of have a health thing in there, but we can, in parallel with that, potentially tie it to securely a digital health pass that says this person has had, for example, is fully vaccinated. And we're doing that we are certainly looking with Canada Border Services Agency about the potential to add that into that pilot that I described.
Okay, excellent, thank you. I'm afraid that is all we have time for this session. Any unanswered questions we will follow up individually with you. A big thank you to all of you for making this such a lively opening Q&A session for this afternoon. Thank you to our speakers, Shiv, John and Martin. Get yourself a cup of coffee or tea, maybe some biscuits, and we shall see you back here at 3 p.m. UK time for what is expected to be a very lively discussion on the critical role of IDD for health and vaccine passports with a great lineup of panelists. Thank you very much.